I ended up coaching. I'd been developing that coaching business and working primarily with business owners over 45 who are trying to come to terms with this stage of life, this upcoming quarter called the fourth quarter, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s if we're lucky. I work with people who have a unique insight and awakening to the fact that the number of squares they have left to fill is a lot less than the number of squares they've filled. And usually there's a sense of, or a question about meaning and purpose. And so it's a tremendous mission field. It's a tremendous opportunity. Every conversation I have is a redemption of the loss I experienced in June of 2015.
Marcus Aurelius said, "What we do in life echoes through eternity." What is your life echoing through eternity? Welcome to Echoes Through Eternity with Dr. Jeffrey Skinner. Our mission is to inspire, engage, and encourage leaders from across the globe to plant missional churches and be servant leaders. So join us and hear the stories of servant leaders reverberating lives as God echoes them through eternity. Brought to you by Missional Church Planting and Leadership Development and Dynamic Church Planting International.
Welcome into Echoes Through Eternity, Season 3. I am joined today by a guest that we had last season, Scott Couchenour. He has a company where he coaches people in their fourth quarter of life, and I'll let him explain more about that. But he and I have become friends since that recording, and I followed him, and I've followed his wisdom and worked with him a little bit, and he's got a community that he has. I'm part of that as well, and just fantastic content. He and I were talking about that before we got started here. And so he and I were talking the other day, and he was telling me about some of the new stuff he's doing and how his work is expanding. And so I thought it'd be good to have him back on because God is continuing to reverberate his voice and echo his voice throughout eternity there, which is what our goal is here, to just continue to amplify those voices. So welcome in, Scott.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be back on the show with you.
Yeah, it's great. So tell us a little bit, remind them, just for those who may not have heard it, and I will make sure that I tag the previous episode that you were on in our show notes for those who may not have heard the first time you were on. But tell us a little bit about your company, and then we'll talk about the new things that you're doing.
Sure. The company name is Serving Strong Enterprises. I started that back in 2007 when I worked for our family business. We designed and built churches across America. And I kind of coached pastors on the side because construction projects can take a toll on pastors. And I cut my teeth on learning all about the coaching business. It was my job as the youngest brother to look into a coaching benefit for our employees. And I fell in love with the dynamic. I hired my own coach, and then I became certified myself. And so the funny thing about Serving Strong, a couple of years prior to that, I started a business and I called it Progress Max. I was going to maximize people's progress and started doing that. But then I started losing the love of coaching, and I put all the books under the bed, and I told God, I said, I'll just coach for the love of coaching. I kind of let go of all the business building. I read a book, Get Clients Now and Book Yourself Solid and all this stuff. And I was really getting frustrated. Well, in November 2007, an epiphany happened. God said to me, I want you to stop calling yourself Progress Max, and I want you to call it Serving Strong. You're going to help people learn how to serve strong from their strength. And that's when that began, and did that for, till 2015, when we had to close our business because of cash flow. I was the COO for about 24 years, and then the board of directors elected me to become CEO to reinvent our company to try and figure out what was wrong. And I was in the process of that, but the 5-year slide, let me back up, 2008 happened. I think a lot of your listeners will remember that. After 2008, we began a 5-year slide and could not figure out what was wrong. And when the board elected me in 2013 to reinvent our family business, I got to work and we started to do things a little differently. And yet that 5-year slide made us vulnerable to one project that had to start in June of 2015. It was a very specific month because we had $20 million under contract and it was in design, and yet we needed this project to bridge the time between now, the time we were at, and being able to do the work of that 20 million. Well, instead of the church starting in June, the pastor had been having an affair, and that became public in June of 2015. So I became a 50-year-old without a career. And I decided in September of that year to formally incorporate Serving Strong Enterprises. And after a couple of years of real struggle with identity, if your listeners know what it's like to have an identity crisis, I could almost write a book on that, because for almost 30 years, I'd attached my identity to what I did, my vocation. And that's not a good thing to do, because your vocation won't always be there. And so I ended up coaching. I've been developing that coaching business and working primarily with business owners over 45 who are trying to come to terms with this stage of life, this upcoming quarter called the fourth quarter, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s if we're lucky. I work with people who have a unique insight and awakening to the fact that the number of squares they have left to fill is a lot less than the number of squares they've filled. And usually there's a sense of, or a question about meaning and purpose. And so it's a tremendous mission field. It's a tremendous opportunity. Every conversation I have is a redemption of the loss I experienced in June of 2015.
When I interviewed the first time, I did not know you that well and had not really experienced any of your coaching. Since then, have really, plugged in and began to follow your content. Like I said earlier, you do just really good work. One of the things I really like about your approach is that, as you know, and those that are out there that are listening, when you're young in life, it's all about striving, right? All about trying to stay on that hamster wheel and create those moments, create the income, be successful, so that you can, kind of reach that fourth quarter and rest. What happened with you was you reached that fourth quarter and you lost your career. It's like, okay, I'm not ready quite to rest yet. But one of the things I've noticed about yours is that you really give permission to people in that fourth quarter to stop striving, to just simply just kind of plug into what God has for them in that time, in that season of their life. And then, and oftentimes it includes, and almost, I think it should include it for everyone, and that is just pouring in, finding someone else to pour into and kind of mentor them until they get to that stage of life and even beyond there as well. And I think we find we've got some really good friends in doing that as well, build some strong relationships. So yeah, if you've got a website that you'd like to, servingstrong.com, is it?
That's correct, servingstrong.com. It's interesting, when I look back on that experience at age 50, I had no choice but to keep working. I felt like I needed to climb another hill. I needed to create something. And that's what I've been doing. It's kind of interesting. I call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I didn't anticipate that, but now I absolutely love it. Here's the thing about the fourth quarter. If we take the first 20 years of life, that I call that your learning quarter. You're going to school, you're being nurtured, you're basically sheltered and you're being fed and that sort of thing. But when you hit your second quarter, which is your 20s and 30s, between 20 and 40, that I call it your building quarter. This is where, you've got a lot of drive, a lot of energy. You feel like you're going to live forever. And so you start to build your family and your name and your career, maybe your business if you start a business. But then you hit the third quarter, which is our 40s and 50s. I call that the reaping quarter. We begin to reap all of the energy, the results of the energy that we had in our second quarter. And of course, as they say, mileage varies, but somewhere in the third quarter, you're awakening to what's really of of meaning and purpose. And I think it's interesting in my study and in my experience, the anecdotal one-on-one experience with clients, is that there is a subtle but distinct and deep shift from pursuing things, pursuing success, whatever you want to call it, to an outward focus on others. It's uncanny. It's really strange that the older we get, let me rephrase that. Not the older we get, but the more keenly aware of our limit in life, we naturally tend to think of others. And I think that's an interesting dynamic. Again, it depends on how old you are. It happens at different ages. Sometimes you may reach this awakening from an external disruption, like in my case. Sometimes it might be an internal disruption. Something inside of you happens. But whatever it is, you have an awakening. And that awakening is, what do I do now? Because you have an awakening when you're reaping everything you've built. And in particular with business owners, they've built a business and they love it and they've been doing it for years. And the people they work with have become like family to them. And now they have this awakening and they're not sure what to do with it. Well, I try through the process of coaching to get them to a poised confidence where they can start over, not from scratch like in their 20s, but they can start from experience and begin to look at their fourth quarter a lot like, let's say you and I are standing on the other side of the road, and on the other side of the road is 1,500 acres. There's mountain, there's forest, meadows, lakes, streams, 1,500 acres. And I say to my clients, look across the road. That's your fourth quarter. Let's take a look at that 1,500 acres and let's build a master plan and phase into this fourth quarter by building blueprints for the first phase, and then start taking action and building, and then see what we learn, maybe make a few adjustments to the master plan, and just keep continuing on. And the best way to describe this, Jeff, is living your fourth quarter by design and not by default.
Absolutely. And it was right after you and I talked, one of the local churches here, the pastor was in his fourth quarter. He was preparing to hand off the reins. He founded the church. It was Kevin Myers. He runs 12 Stone. Founded that church, has been running that church for 30 plus years, has grown it with the help of God, obviously, from zero to now over 20,000 people worldwide, nationwide. He has campuses, and then they have 12 Stone Home, which is basically people watching the streaming. And it was born out of almost said 9/11, not 9/11, COVID, the other emergence we had in America in the last 25 years. But anyway, I'm beginning to think they're trying to speed those up, but that's a different topic for a different time. But anyway, so he began to work that same process that you're talking about. He recognized that, he had spent that first 3 quarters of his life kind of striving and working, and now he had to kind of work on that legacy a little bit. And as he was preparing to hand off, that was a massive responsibility he's handing off. And so he began to take those within the congregation through his own journey, kind of much like you're doing with others now. He began to take them through it. He used a book, you and I reached out to you if you were aware of it, and he was taking them through it, called From Strength to Strength.
Absolutely.
And it talks about that same type of thing. It's much more negative, at least in the first few chapters there, than what you are. It pretty much defines reality for you in your fourth quarter, so to speak. But one of the things that it says is that in that fourth quarter is that we use things, we love people, and we worship the divine. And I think that's pretty much surmises or summarizes, what your teaching is there and what you're trying to help people get to. I know now, is everything that you do as you talk to people, is everything you do Christian oriented? Like, do you only coach Christians, or do you coach the secular as well? Do you find a lot of people that may not have a Christian identity plugging in with you and resonating with you?
I consider what I do. Well, first of all, let me start off by answering your question. Every morning, I remind myself that serving strong is not my business. I sold it to God. I gave it to him. He owns it, and I'm a steward. So therefore, with that foundation, everything that I do, I consider a mission field. And I think a best way to describe this is I coach human beings. Human beings are on all over the spectrum of a spiritual awareness. And quite honestly, I think working in this space gives me a unique perspective and a unique opportunity to work with people who, as I've described, have awakened. A lot of people that I work with, they're awakening, but they don't really know what they're awakening to. And now, having said all that, my witness, my walk with God and my witness, I have chosen, or I believe is what is right for me, is to take a come and see approach to my witness. I don't say you must believe the way I believe. It's just come and see. A lot like the woman at the well. Come and see this man who has changed my life. Because I can't tell anyone what to do, but I can show them I'm a failure in process. Right. I have made multiple mistakes. And yet when I look in my rearview mirror, I see God's hand in so many situations. And it gives me confidence when I look out the windshield as to where I'm headed. And everybody has a story. Mm-hmm. Every single one of us has our own unique story. And I think that when I work with someone, whether they overtly and expressly share their witness or non-witness, a witness of Christ or the lack thereof, that does not deter me, because I've had some of the most fascinating spiritual conversations with non-Christian people who have not made that commitment yet.
Right.
So I don't target.
Yeah.
From a marketing standpoint, I don't target the Christian community, although I've got a mix. I think I will always have a mix.
Yeah, so you talked about you coach pastors to begin with, and so what you're doing now is almost, it's not the opposite end of the spectrum, but you're right. As a pastor, if you start targeting, if you lead with that, if you lead with I'm a Christian, there's just going to be a certain segment that's going to turn that off, because unfortunately, and we're human, we make mistakes, as you said, we've all got a story, but Christians have not always been a good advertisement for the brand.
Yes. Yeah. And along with the laughing is a bit of sorrow.
Yeah, that's right. It is. And so, but the point is, if we lead with that, and that's what I love about your business, is you don't lead with that. You just lead with your coaching human beings in the fourth quarter. But in the process of that, I mean, it's clear, as I have engaged your content, everything you do is a Christian biblical foundation there. Mm-hmm. But it's just not obvious. It's just not thrown in their face.
Right.
And so it's kind of like telling people, hey, don't play in traffic. Well, okay, that's just kind of a good idea,
right?
To not play in traffic. If it happens to also be consistent with living an abundant life, great.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say that I was speaking with a colleague who has his own podcast, and I noticed on his LinkedIn profile, his pronoun is Christ follower. And I thought, so I talked to him about it. I said, that is amazing to me. And his rationale was, look, we're in a world where people are identifying as, and then you fill in the blank, as a she, as a he, as a they. And why not identify as a Christ follower? So I decided to put that in my pronoun on LinkedIn. I used to have Christ follower in my descriptor, my headline on LinkedIn. Took that out, put Christ follower in my pronoun, and I do a mix of, man, I'm a family man, I'm a founder, I'm a solopreneur, I'm a coach, I'm a value builder, podcaster, author, and coffee connoisseur. That's who I am. That's the makeup. And I just put a post on LinkedIn yesterday as of this recording. The perspective from my Sunday morning, I'm on the worship team, and it was a perspective from behind the keyboard that I was playing. I don't play every Sunday. Yeah. So I try to mix it up because we're all human. We have interests. We do things. We're not this plastic piece of content generation and this business machine. We are human beings with flesh and blood and fears and anxieties. And I mean, none of us is immune to that.
We're not Barbies and Kens.
No, we're not.
It was interesting.
At least I'm not.
I went to see that movie, and I was the only guy. I mean, I'm 57 years old. People looked at me so weird when I went to that movie. I was in there with young kids and their moms, like, who is this guy in here? They're like suspicious.
Yeah.
But it was when you said that, though, it was interesting that the overall theme of that movie, as much as it was panned by various people with their various agendas trying to, get from it out of there, I actually enjoyed the movie. But it was the whole thing was that they wanted to be seen as human almost. They were, that was the irony of the whole thing, is this was based on Ken dolls and Barbie dolls who were plastic. And the movie was about humanizing the persona of the caricature that they had been created to be.
Right.
And, and the interesting thing was Barbie, by intention, by her founder, had all kinds of depth. She was an astronaut. She was a mom. She was a business executive. She was all these different Barbies that they had out there. Ken was just Ken. And so a lot of it was about Ken trying to figure out who he was, trying to figure out his identity and things like that. So kind of an accidental review of Barbie movie here, but I think it was well, you brought up that plastic and I think that's it. We did that though. And I think social media has exacerbated that to an extent, where we create a caricature of someone and pull out one little snippet of what they've said or one picture that they've created, and suddenly that becomes the entirety of who they are. And again, what you do is help people discover not just who they are, but how God, and not just how God does that. You do, but in a kind of a sneaky way.
Well, yeah, I can't change who I am.
Right.
I was raised in a Midwest Christian tradition. I went through the phase of believing because I was told. That was the thing. Then I went through a bit of rebellion in my early married life and came to terms with, okay, what I was taught, I have to choose myself. And I did choose for myself that what I was taught was actually a generally a pretty good way to go. And as I've gone, now the interesting thing is in June of 2015, when we had to shut down the business, that was after a 44-year run. And
Wow.
we designed and built churches. We had built 670 churches over that 44 years. And by my calculation, about 500 million square feet of shelter for worship and ministry, which is what we called it. We tithed. We did everything. We were doing God's work, and yet this happened. So I referred to those 2 years of identity crisis. Part of it was, shaking my fist at a God I thought I had understood, that if I did good stuff and kept tithing, kept giving, that he would in turn take care of me. And that until I came to the realization that I had an erroneous perspective of God, I was really angry with him. Look, we aren't designing and building shelter for brothels, and we're not withholding our tithe from you. And yet, what are you doing? Well, I came to the conclusion that, and basically it's a realization from God, that when you've got God figured out, when you have reduced him to a transactional connection, your God is too small.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because what happened was, in that 2 years as CEO to reinvent our company, which, by the way, was actually working, I believe that I was being led to come up with that process. When the company closed, I thought all of that work for nothing. However, now, in working with business owners in my business, I'm able to take what that 2 years of work and apply it to multiple businesses. So there is this concept of death and resurrection all over the place.
Yeah.
And that's what it was. It was a death of what I thought was going to be life.
Yeah.
And the resurrection was multiple to what the fish and the loaves that were prayed over, and then 12 baskets left over, the acorn that falls and creates a forest. That was the experience looking back.
Yeah. That is so good and so interesting that you said that, because in church planting and revitalization, that is something that is key. I mean, it's a key concept in everything that they do. And for you, well, you had to let go of one life, and God resurrected you for the new life. And I mean, everything about that, and it's biblical, obviously, but Jesus says, he who wants to save his life must lose his life. No greater love than no greater love is there than a man who lays down his life for another. And I think I messed that scripture up a little bit, but
it's close.
It's bad when you're a pastor and you quote scripture bad, but there's so many churches out there that are struggling, and so many businesses that are struggling, and so many people that are struggling. And I think they're holding on to that life preserver for dear life, thinking, if I could just keep my head above water, and they're exhausted, and they're on the verge of giving up. And, they just feel like that if they let go, they're going to drown. And so what I try to teach people, especially those that are wanting to revitalize, is that when, I feel like the key for revitalization oftentimes is planting, and they look at you like you got three eyes, and they're like, how is planting going to help revitalize our church? And I say it's the concept of tithes, it's the concept of laying down your life, it's the concept of resurrection. It is you're letting go of what you think is good and allowing God to create something better. And he will, it's scary. Nobody said that sacrifice was easy. It wouldn't be sacrifice if it were easy, right?
Right.
And so it's like you said, though, it's not that transactional thing with God. It's just that trusting in God.
Yeah, it's a relationship, not a transaction. And what might possibly make it easier to sacrifice is something that, through my experience, I've looked back, and there's a difference between identity and expression. And let me explain that. In my struggle to regain my identity, where it was attached to my vocation, and when vocation was gone, identity was gone. What I learned through that was I had attached my identity erroneously to an expression. My vocation, the thing that you do, is an expression of who you are, so that your identity is And in the context of our conversation here, our identity is in Christ. He created us in his image. That is our identity. When you wake up and your head lifts from the pillow and you become conscious, your identity is there. It's not what you say during the day. It's not what you do for a paycheck. It's not the business you started. It is, period. You are created in his image. So when I look at it that way, my vocation, I can let go of a vocation a lot easier when I see that it doesn't impact my identity. It's just an expression of my identity. So I can have multiple expressions of my identity. So therefore, I try to promote the idea of being in the act of becoming the fullest expression of your unique God-given design. When you are in the act of becoming the fullest expression, that's ideal, we'll never be there, but if we're pushing to the fullest expression, then two things happen. Today, our fulfillment goes up. We are fulfilled when we are in the act of becoming the fullest expression of our unique God-given design. And tomorrow, regrets go down. We can mitigate regrets simply by being in the act of becoming the fullest expression of our unique God-given design. And that design is our identity. I think that makes it a little bit easier for us to let go.
Yeah, that's good. Such wisdom you have there, Scott. Again, just want to remind folks that we are talking with Scott Couchenour. He runs Serving Strong Ministry, Serving Strong Enterprises. His website is servingstrong.com. He coaches human beings in the fourth quarter of life. And I guess beginning about 45 years old. Of course, you have people that are younger than that as well. And I like the fact that you say that, it's generally about that time, but you don't necessarily put an age on there. It's just a matter of awareness, really, more than it is age. And so good for others, good for anyone who recognizes at 20 years of age that it's not about them and it's about others,
Right.
So, and really it's about him, but he's about others. And therefore we make it about others.
Right.
And that is just so important. It's such an important message today because there is so much about us instead of, the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do a sociological study or a theological study and say that that's, simply the inevitability of the USA culture being individualistic. Now we've just gotten to hyper individualism and everything else. And that's, again, that's a debate for other folks. But regardless, I feel like that our point is to make it about others, there's so much focus on the individual that it's about our individual wants, our individual needs. When we make it about other people, it's counterintuitive. When we make it about other people, that's when we experience our greatest fulfillment. That's when we find our purpose, is when we discover that it's not about ourselves. Right. And interestingly enough, you don't have to strive nearly as much. You find yourself, when you're living in that way, you become a magnet for others. Other people begin to be drawn to you. It's not you going out there trying to market to others and can sell yourself to others or anything like that. That's so exhausting. You're trying to constantly sell yourself to others because you feel fake. It's inauthentic. And I think especially today, for a generation, that younger generation has been marketed to their entire lives and just bombarded with advertisements day in and day out. They love authenticity. And so what you're teaching in the fourth quarter is simply be who you are. Just be authentic. Be who God created you to be, even if you don't use those exact words. Right. And in so doing, you find your purpose, you find fulfillment, and you find abundant life.
That's right. That's right. A long time ago, I latched on to this idea that I'm going to serve people. That is my marketing.
Yeah, that's good.
Serving before selling. Relationship over transaction. So I learned through that experience with God, I thought I had him figured out because I had him as a transaction, not a relationship. That has spilled over into my quote marketing and sales efforts. I will only, nobody likes to be sold to. and yet we're still being sold to all the time, right? I think every one of us has something they're working on. And in every conversation, I simply try my best to see how I can serve them with what I know. And then if they say, what does it look like to work with you? To me, it's just, again, I'm not selling, I'm informing. I just basically say, here's how it works. So, yeah, and I'm pleased to know that I think that we as humans, we're moving in that direction to where we're not selling ourselves near as much. But COVID kind of accelerated that. You know, people started taking down their power poses in their pictures and starting putting real life, you know, no makeup kind of thing. And I think this drive for authenticity was accelerated by COVID. Kind of a let's get real with each other. And to me, that is much more of a natural way to build business.
Yeah. Well, when you feel like you're dying, you're not too worried about how you look, right?
That's true.
We all thought we were going to die there the first couple of weeks. But,
that's true. That is true.
Okay. I want everybody to see the real me before I get COVID and die.
That's right.
We can laugh about it 3 years later, right? But anyway,
yeah. At least we can try.
That's right. Scott, it's great having you here. I love what you do. Like I said, you are welcome on here anytime. You know, reach out. I'm glad you reached out this time when we're talking on LinkedIn. Yeah. Servingstrong.com. How do they find your community? I really like that community that you have. What's it called?
It's on a Mighty Networks platform, but it's called finishstrong.me. Right.
Finishstrong.me. So I encourage, if you're listening to this, join his community as well. There's a lot of different people on there, a lot of different topics, a lot of good stuff. I like learning from the wisdom of others. You know, it's one thing to pick up a book and read it, but you really have to mine that book, and it's a lot of work for the wisdom in there. I mean, as an author, and I'm an author, and got lots of friends that are authors. There's a lot of filler that goes into books, right? So you really have to look for that gold nugget within, or that diamond within the contents of that book. When you're learning from the wisdom of others, I feel like we're getting the diamonds aftermarket. You know, we're not getting the diamonds in the rough. We're not having to mine the content. They've already mined it for us, and it's just fantastic stuff. So I encourage folks, join community that Scott has there. It's a free community. It doesn't cost anything. There is a subscription if you want to do that, but you can just be like me and just get me a fly on the wall as well. So,
sure. Yeah, that's Finish. And you can get there, finishstrong.mn, which stands for mightynetworks.co.
Okay, MN. Gotcha.
Yeah,
okay.
mn.co.
mn.co. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Any last wisdom you want to share for our listeners here?
Just take it a step at a time and keep learning. Every day gives us multiple opportunities to learn about ourselves and about others. So reflect on, at the end of every day, reflect on what happened. Don't try to fix it or worry about it or think, oh, what did I do wrong? Just reflect.
That's good.
And step back and look at it.
That's great. Scott Couchenour, Serving Strong Ministries, servingstrong.com is the name of his website. Again, join his community as well. And like and subscribe so that this is becoming more popular. This is our third season here, and it just continues to grow. I've been impressed with the amount of people engaging in the podcast, even in the old seasons when I haven't been broadcasting. And so anyway, just appreciate all those folks out there that are doing that. So share it with your friends. And we'll be posting this, Scott, just for your information. This will be sometime in October. This will post. I'm recording everything ahead of time.
Sure.
And that way everything can be consistent. Thank you, brother.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Jeffrey. Thank you.
You can be a co-creator with God by helping to echo our voices. Share our episodes with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Give us positive 5-star reviews. The more positive reviews we have, the more visibility we have, and the more voices that are echoed through eternity. We often invite guests who are serving faithfully year after year, often in anonymity in their respective roles and ministries. God sees them, and the reality is for a good kingdom leader, that's enough. We do not do what we do for the accolades of humanity. We do it because we're called by God. But I believe that God uses people like you and I to continue those reverberations and echo them throughout eternity. You can partner with God by liking, subscribing, or writing a quick positive 5-star review, and again, sharing those voices with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Those reviews will eventually lead to other guests who have larger platforms that have more listeners, who will then in turn listen to the show. And again, it further echoes those voices, which is the whole vision of the Echoes Through Eternity podcast here, is to continue echoing those voices that God is echoing through eternity there.